Hello, my name is Chris Blask. I'm going to be your host yet again for an inevitability curve episode where we take some current topic and look at it over periods of time. Spans of time could be very long periods of time. The conversations will determine. So today we're going to be joined by Deb Radcliff, that I have known for quite some time. Hey, Deb, how are you?
Good. How are you, Chris?
I'm loving life. There's hurricanes and all sorts of things, but there's always a Vogon battle fleet coming to destroy the Earth.
Did your twins get through the hurricane okay? I haven't checked my Facebook yet.
I lost Starlink connection last night. There was obviously some damage. It may just be the power system on the one boat, Sam Clemens, got wet, so the AC power is down. But I'm sure they're fine. I'm going to have a friend fly over with a drone on Saturday when the winds come down, and we'll assess things and go from there. So these are the solar-powered boats I've been sailing up and down the Florida coast as Devin.
Yep, and they're remote to you right now, so you have to do remote management of them.
That's right. I'm 1,000 miles away in Ontario, Canada. So I'm logging in through my apps and devices to control cameras and water cannon to keep some of the bird population down and do other things. But now I can't do any of that.
If you aren't Facebook friends with Chris, you miss all this stuff. He has videos of the water cannon going after the birds and stuff. It's fun.
Well, Instagram is more public, I think. It's funny how we use social media these days, right? Which is getting us to our topic, right? My expectations of anything on Facebook is effectively you may as well just post it on Twitter. It may as well be just be public. However, right, there's the friends posting, and then there's when we turn public on and saying, no, really, I am saying this, and so be it, God, right? So we develop these sort of levels, right?
Yeah.
But before I get into all that, right, as we're talking about in the green room, you and I met somewhere back in the 90s. I think when you first started doing this stuff, and I was doing firewall stuff, and the path you have taken is investigative journalism, cybercrime, fiction, narrative, talking about how we put all this stuff together from a perspective that is now fairly common, but has developed entirely under your purview. So it's been a hell of a path. How's that been?
Well, in 1995, when I was working on a book about Kevin Mitnick, my eyes got opened. And then in 96, I started telling magazines like Byte that they needed information to get out to their readers because this was going to be a juicy, scary situation, and that their readers weren't ready for it, that the corporate America wasn't ready for it, that government wasn't ready for it, and neither were the poor consumers, that we were leading to the web like sheep to the slaughter at the time, and then blaming them for getting hacked. And so it's always been my mission to sort of blend all three of those constituents together as I do my reporting. You and I were talking before we went live about how I felt back then. I was the only one shouting in the wilderness that this was coming and this was here, and we needed to deal with it with legislation, with better security controls. I remember when Cisco adopted its first firewall. I think it was through acquisition. Was it Accent Technologies, or who did they acquire when they came up with the Cisco PIX firewall way back then?
That was a kind of interesting backstory behind that. That was Network Translation Incorporated. To this day, great friend Richard Clark. I'm going to go to hell for this. I've forgotten his name, but there's a guy that was at the same time that I was out there in the world, thinking about firewall things. And this it really leads me down this whole inevitability curve thing, right? Because the network address translation, this whole 192.168 thing. I had this idea for a firewall, and my boss in our little company had said, okay, let's do this in 1992, 91, 92. And we're running along, and somebody said, hey, there's not enough IP addresses on the internet. And I lost my mind a little bit because he was right. I'd never really thought about it. And I ran to my boss's office and said, oh, no, maybe this whole thing's a bad idea. And he didn't blink an eye, and he says, John Alsop, he said, I found that anytime there's enough of a need, a technical solution is just found. And within 15 minutes, Andrew Flint and Elmaya Algundi board came up with network address translation. And
wow.
point of the story here is that John Mays, so did John Mays and Richard Clark, because he was consulting and setting people up with internet addresses, internet connections. And every time he did it, their IP address was a mess. And he thought, this is a thing. So he came up with the same table mechanism that we came up with. And at the same time, another group who wrote the actual RFC, Tony something or whatnot, did the same thing. So it was just time.
Wow.
Fun to
I forgot how hands-on you were back then.
It's been a strange world. But NTI was the PIX firewall. Actually,
that was it. Okay.
At Cheese Dogs at an Internet World Conference back when it was like 80 people or whatever, probably not quite that small, with John, and he had the PIX, the private internet exchange, and I had the border-aware firewall. If I was a firewall, he wasn't. So after that, he was, right. And then we competed in the market for a while, and I ended up at Cisco running his old firewall. But that was the time to pave the world with firewalls, right? We went from,
wow.
It was supposed to be end of life to end of '98. John Chambers and the executive staff had actually issued the end of life, and myself and Adam Wald and a bunch of folks kept it alive through the winter of '98, '99, and the rest was that path.
Okay, so what I got confused with was Accent Technologies was one of the first intrusion detection companies, and I'm not sure if they're the one that got acquired by Cisco.
Wheel Group got acquired from Austin,
Wheel
Texas.
Group. Okay,
Wheel Group.
And when I interviewed the Wheel Group, they didn't even have a quote-unquote product, and they were telling me about a virtual first ever, what they suspected was a mob hit on a patient in a hospital, and the nurse was about to go to court because they were going to blame her, but somehow they found through their intrusion detection someone had gone and changed a record in the computer right before the nurse administered the medicine that killed the patient. I was never able to go public with that because that was all told to me off the record. And sometimes I don't know how much to believe, but it was one of the founders of the Wheel Group. I remember I think we were in Texas, having a meal together. And he was telling me the story, and I was just going, God, why can't I report on this, And so that was way back before anybody had a name for intrusion detection, except for maybe Becky Bates over at the NSA.
Right, Becky. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell I'm going to have to really try to control the squirrel instinct, in this conversation, because we can take this everywhere, right? And this
exactly
parts of that story right there. That's literally the murder mystery sort of thing we associate with crime novels and the kind of things you're doing now. And there's always that boundary between, let's say for a second, investigative journalism and narrative fiction.
Yes.
Right? And that line between the two, right?
Yep. And that one would have made a great Hollywood movie even back then. The narrative fiction, Richard Clark has taken the same path that I've taken. He published his first fiction book long before I did. And it was more of a sort of a single case, legal case. And I remember getting on his case because he sort of skipped over the romance scenes. And I said, you're pretty shy about that. And he says, I don't care. I'm going to write it the way I'm going to write it. But I really liked his book, his first book, and I haven't read his other books yet. But that wasn't something I was ready to do yet. That was years before I put my series out. But the culmination of all of our experiences, right, Chris? And as a journalist, my people have always been the hackers. Law enforcement and federal agencies came later when they finally caught up. But in the beginning, it was just the hackers. And some of them acted tougher than they were. Some of them were a little scary. But most of them were very helpful. They helped me get on the internet for the first time ever. I had to pay long distance for a point of presence way back then. I don't know if you remember those days. Dial-up modems. And then after that, they were the ones who were sounding the alarms. Going to my first DevCon was extremely eye-opening, and just moving forward. So the hackers are the good guys in my cyber thriller series because they're the ones who want to fight this corporation that's taking over the world through human chip implants. And they're the ones who end up helping the NSA avert a cyber war. And people say, does this stuff really happen? Yes, it really happens. NSA brings in hackers all the time. They need them for certain things. They bring them in. Some of them end up hiring in with the NSA, so it's all of it was based on technical fact, historical fact, possibilities that could be done with today's tech. And I wrote that because I wanted people to understand what people like Chris Blask and others do in the hands-on environments that they're in, trying to stave off this tidal wave of cyber threats.
Well, and as I think about this conversation we're having, this is, I think, maybe my favorite episode to date on this topic, because you and I shared this experience, right? And now we're both here, right? And back in your first days, you as well. We're both sort of young folks. I speak for myself. I'm like,
I was in my 30s. I'm not going to say how old I am now, but you can extrapolate.
Right. And I remember being so sort of suggesting things getting slapped down for them that today, as you say, our peers and our folks, Fred Cohen, who coined the term computer virus in his PhD thesis, right, in the late 80s. And you mentioned Kevin Mitnick, right? These are the names back in the earliest days before I got into cybersecurity. These are the names you'd heard. You'd seen the thing on national news about this thing. That was when Fred and Kevin were both, the folks everybody was talking about. And then there was the I Love You virus, one of my favorite.
That's the one I remember. I'm like, why is Ernst & Young sending me a note that says I love you? And I immediately realized there was something wrong, but it was the first virus I ever received. But it was weird.
I think it was the I Love You virus, but I may be saying this one wrong. There was one actual real virus, but this one was it was an email that said, hey, tell all your friends there's this virus called I Love You virus. And if you open the email, it'll delete your hard drive, right? And then what the internet was all text back in those days, the Usenet, news groups, email, and so forth. And that just got enough people just said, I better do the right thing and post this to all my news groups. And then everybody else replied to say, stop posting this to all the news groups. And it literally took down the internet, all over the world.
It did. And I had like a dozen emails that morning, and every single subject line in capital letters, I love you.
Right.
And I was like, gosh, this is just weird. So it was my first time I'd ever been emailed a virus before, and of course I didn't click anything or do anything. As like you said, everything was really rudimentary back then. But
the point of this, particularly in this conversation, is there was no virus. The whole joke, is there was no virus. The virus was the email. It was people sending emails back and forth, right? And then. And for those folks,
so it was more of a DDoS type thing or a spam,
right? And I'm sitting there in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada. This little internet company, it was before we came up with the firewall idea, and trying not to work, of course, and waste my time on Usenet like the kids do these days, and I just couldn't help chiming in and saying, because everybody was saying, stop sharing this email. It's not a real virus. It's a hoax. It's a hoax. It's not a real virus. It's a hoax. It's not a virus. And I just couldn't help myself. And I had to say, actually, I think it is a virus. It's like a wetware virus, which started this whole other argument thread that went back and forth, and consumed more of the remaining last bit of on Earth. But it was, and everybody, shouted me down, right? My point there was I was just this young guy. I don't know what I'm talking about, and I felt pretty sure about it, but all the authoritative figures and academia and so forth jumping all over me. And I do a podcast with Fred. We've had a radio show together. We the last 10, 15.
Fred Cohen,
yeah, we did.
Yeah,
talking all the time. We're recording another episode of that podcast tomorrow. And I've got to live and have my career long enough to go and ask the guy that coined the term, right? Was that a virus? Or was that wrong, or was that a mimetic virus? Somebody wrote code.
And what did they say?
Fred, absolutely, it's a virus. Yeah,
that's what I thought. Okay.
Yes, it's pertinent to both our topic here and to kind of the world that we've been talking about the past, how we got to this point, right? And now we're at this point where things like that, this concept of a virus, everybody knows what a virus is today. It's not 1991 anymore. but we're approaching, I think, a common understanding of what misinformation, mental viruses. People are trying to write
Oh yeah,
code that goes into your head and makes you do things like forward this email to your friends,
Yep.
just like in 1991 or whenever that was,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Except 5, 7, 10 years ago, most your friends and family don't really understand that idea. But I think just like computer viruses, the misinformation, disinformation, information integrity, we want to give it a positive term, is something we've all got in our heads now, right?
Yes.
So where do you think we've gotten to with all that, several decades of you and I and various other folks trying to get information security into the popular culture?
Into the minds of the common man. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot more awareness. Right, the non-geek, right?
Yes, that's right. The normal people.
Right. There's a lot more awareness. So my Breaking Backbones Hacker Trilogy book has been at many book reading groups. And one of the biggest ones, I was at a regional session with a bunch of retired ladies. And when I stood in front of them, they asked me to read a section from the book, and then we did question and answers. They were very sophisticated in the questions they were asking about. I got this on my mobile device. This is what I did to get back at them. And I'm like, well, that's really smart. I'm actually going to use that trick that you just taught me, 79-year-old lady, So it was very nice to see the level of awareness has extremely improved since way back then. I remember about 10 years into my career when everybody started getting mobile phones. I was at my bank, and there was this young girl pregnant with her young boyfriend, and you could tell they had emancipated. They were on their own. They weren't 18 yet. And the girl comes in with her phone, and this was heartbreaking. She started saying, and she was in line. She didn't want to wait in line because she was in trouble. And she said, I just gave this man money because they said I needed to blah, blah, blah. And she's waving her phone and she goes, now they want more money and I don't have any more money. What do I do? And the whole line and all the tellers got silent. And I was in the front of the line. And I turned and I said, honey, you've been hosed. Like, you're in trouble. You got your money stolen. And she goes, what? And she starts crying. I said, please step in front of me. Go up and talk to a manager right now and see what they can do to help you. And that was my eye-opening moment about handheld devices and how we had the first level of us got educated, because I came from a general assignment newspaper background. That's why I'm for every man out there in the cyberspace. I didn't come from a geek background. So I remember thinking, okay, so wave one was email and computers and then laptops. Wave two was handheld devices. She had never had a computer. She had never had a laptop, but now she had this smartphone in her hand and she was getting scammed off the phone. So fast forward 15, 20 years later, however long it's been since cell phones got into the hands of everybody. And I think that the level of sophistication is gone. We understand that bad things come in text. We understand that, people are trying to scam us on social media. What we're not understanding is we still believe what we read on social media, like news. And that's the misinformation part that's happening now. That's the part that's really scary. I, as a journalist, you as a journalist and an analyst and a thought leader, I have to sort through stuff that I see. And if it's that hard for me, and we've got deep fakes and everything else coming down the road, we've got elections, we've got misinformation, social media is now the big bugaboo in terms of misinformation. And how do we set filters? How do we create an easier environment for these people to either sort through, or should we just unplug? Because did you read Neil Stephenson's book, Seven Eves?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, do you remember how the space colony basically killed themselves off because of misinformation on social media?
I love Stevenson, and my first bit of journalism was an article in the Index News in the 12th grade, high school newspaper, where I did a review of THX 1138. And my summary there was, this has nothing to do with futurism. This is commentary on current social issues. And I love Stevenson, but he does the same sort of thing, right? So I'm hoping, and that's my whole whole point of this whole inevitability curve thing, and it is that 5,000 years from now we'll probably have figured this out. Even if
5,000, we need to figure it out faster than that.
Right, for inside joke for the Neil Stephenson fans. But this is, yeah, I think this speaks a lot to where we are right now, right? And
Yep.
And again, your background is a fascinating one on top of it, because you've both done this, transition across what we now call content creation. We used to call writing.
Oh yeah, there's so much content out there now.
But but in cybersecurity and privacy and cybercrime and all these other related topics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find in the information integrity space, I think that really is the issue. We see disinformation campaigns and influence campaigns of malicious actors and so forth, but it's really not all of those negative things. It's about information integrity, right? We've got, you and I both know that the actual ability of the public, private, commercial, technical community to deliver the integrity you think you're actually getting from information, we're not there yet. It never was.
I mean, so my 3 LinkedIn
want to change things by issuing a certain amount of bullshit. That's actually possible for now, but it's not likely to be possible forever. And in part because of what we were just talking about. I think everybody, all of my friends, I had a shout out to another lifelong friend, Bud Houston, best guy on earth. I've known his son Trey since he was born. He's now a retired military veteran, great guy, great. I want to say great kid because I'm 60 years old, but whatever, right? And he's exactly the kind of guy, he's very patriotic, very energetic. He always has been. Believe it, was this tall. Holy cow! But and so he's absolutely not an idiot, right? But he's, thank God, in some of the same social media that I am, instead of retreating and saying this. I've had the opportunity to counter a little bit and say, all right, what you're seeing, I don't think is what you think it is, and connect him with other friends. Well, John Bumgarner, John in.
He's been posting about his damage in Nashville.
Right, and he's this is for anybody who doesn't know John Bumgarner, you should, because he's a retired military combat veteran, wonderful guy, peer and pillar and icon of the information security community. As a reputable source, I mean, seriously, if you want any more better than John, you're not getting it. Lives in Nashville. His tree was hit by an 80-foot oak tree. He's been organizing his community, and he understands emergency response. Right.
Yep, so, and he's been sharing his capabilities with his community.
Right, and his experience with the rest of us. And to our point of our thread here, I think that sort of thing works, right? I think we need better technical things and maybe some regulations, God help us, or laws or whatnot, how information is handled. But I think most of it is a public understanding. We need to evolve past this. Maybe a generational kind of thing. I think Trey's generation is in a better position than ours, perhaps, right? To really,
I challenge that assumption a little bit, Chris. Because we are sharing understanding. We fact check, we put stuff out there, and people still want to believe what they want to believe.
Well, I my caveat to what I just said was today, right? I think in 10 and 20 and 30, 40 years, that this generation now is living through it from my kids' age, the 20-something, 30-something,
much more exposure than we had when we were kids. We had no exposure to any of this. My kids grew up with one computer in the living room, and now they all have their phones and everything. Parents have to deal with that. So everybody's getting exposed from a very young age now. And what does that mean? Sometimes I think we are part of a large video game that we put ourselves in that's very realistic, and when we die, we go back to whatever it was we came from, and then we have a virtual world within the virtual world happening now, and you start looking at this like when you're looking at 100 different mirrors and you see all the images of the images of the images, and that's what it's feeling like to me right now.
And it really does, right? It's really common, and it's easy to feel that way. And you can see us expressing it through popular culture. Mort not Morty, Rick and Morty, right? And
Oh yeah.
the multiple. There's so many different parallel universes. Doesn't matter what anybody does in any one of them, or simulation. I like that one, right? We're living
Yeah.
inside a simulation, inside a simulation, inside a simulation, and
Yeah.
uh, and I think So and looking, just try to get this at the end of this. You're looking forward, right? So I
Yep.
think we posit this. I do think the generations coming up, the millennials and so on, and around them, will over time. I think they were kind of the answer to this information integrity thing, in part because,
I
as
think
you were
so
saying,
too.
they were literally, you and I have had to learn this. We came from a world where, seriously, the amount of information, when you say 3 channels of television, you don't understand, right?
I remember those days.
Right, and that's the antennas and tinfoil, but we really do have a cohort of folks who are coming along who
Yep.
are quite bright or quite educated, quite connected. Maybe
Yep.
as a Gestalt group, a little confused today, but give them 10 years, another 10 years, another 10 years, and tell me we haven't worked our way through this.
I agree. I might be working on a book about seasoned expert advice from our top security pros, the icons in the industry. It's may or may not happen, but if I do, I think that what we need to do is we need a two-way dialogue from the old folks down and from the young folks up, because I know young folks are much more open with their use of technology than I am. I'm shy. I'm not shy, but I'm careful what I adopt. What I don't do TikTok. I don't, I use Instagram, but not TikTok. And there are places I stay away from because I know that they're not controlled by the US or, other reasons. And the rest of the kids, the younger people, just don't care where their platforms are going to be. Their platforms are going to be their platforms. And so I look at that as they are going to be teaching us eventually, because they've got the background and the savvy that maybe some of us don't have.
With 3 kids in their 20s, spanning that decade, I am biased. That's my bias statement. I just agree, and it was just not to say I know what it is exactly, what that future is going to look like, right? But I see. There's certainly the ability, we're going to have the ability to have a good future, 10 years and 20 years and 30 years and 40 years and 50 years from now. That's,
I won't be here then, but yeah.
Well, I won't either. Right? I know young folks who will. And heck, with some medicine, I've always tried to look at that one as like, look, I'm not planning on being the first one to benefit from that life, sending, technology or medicine and whatnot. But I won't be surprised if at any point in my life, it seems more and more clear that someone my age is going to live to be really old. Like if you're lucky enough to live to 120, anyways, and you're 60 now, we're talking 60 years from now, you might be, a good candidate for some of the, genetic or God knows what medical changes happen in the next 60 years. So that, look, none of us need to count on this, to is my point here. But, we're in that realm, right? So my kids, the generation after them, there are people walking around right now that I have an interest in seeing the future for and thinking about this, right?
True that.
Every time I've seen angst and, all my life, right? We're going to run out of food, we're going to nuke ourselves to death, yada, yada, yada.
It's amazing we haven't yet. It's amazing
right?
we haven't yet.
I frankly don't think we're going to. Right? I don't think Kim Jong-il is going to launch a thing because he likes his caviar and schnapps and he's a spoiled little brat. But
a spoiled big brat.
Yes. But
but yeah, back to the future, like where we're going in the future. I see some of that where the younger people are going to come up the ranks and come up with new solutions and new ways of utilizing technology, and then screening. My whole career, I feel like I've been can I use a bad word here?
Oh, absolutely. We're on the
My whole career has been to be a shit screen. And there is a lot of information coming at security leaders that needs to be filtered before it gets to them. because every vendor in the book thinks that they have the silver bullet. And my whole job has been to be say, yeah, no. So you fix this little problem over here, but there's these 10,000 problems over here that you're missing. And so no way are you going to be the silver bullet. It's also asking the hard questions. Were you at the Cisco event when, I don't know, 20 years ago, I raised my hand and I said, excuse me, Mr. Cisco people, it seems to me like we should change internet protocol. We should change IP, or we should get rid of it altogether. I got laughed out of the room. And now we have IPv6, but even that isn't good enough. We're still on technology that was created in the 80s. And it's open and says, hello, here I am. I'm sending out my beacon. Hello, I'm here. Come hack me. And that's the way I've always seen IP. And so the whole thing about Cisco laughing me out of the room, and then 20 years later, we've got IPv6. Those are the hard questions no one really stops to ask. No one really stops to, maybe we do need to tear it out and start over, or start over and then tear it out with some, once we have something better, but those are the big questions too, I think we need to be looking at in the future.
I think, this conversation has led to an interesting point, right? Because I think that, if I can be really honest about the short-term future, the next 20, 30 years on these topics, it could go either way. It's tending to look pretty ugly. You're right. There's legacy issues that it will take a lot of redoing. But in that same era, this whole cohort of, what you and I can call kids these days, we're going to get to our age, and they'll come up with all sorts of amazing things. So I think we'll get out of that midterm, that we can see really, see close enough from here to do things about it.
I hope the smart people don't get egos, though, like Elon Musk has. And I think that we need smart people helping, but not trying to become gods. And I find in the technical industry, there's so much ego. And as a female in the industry who has to interview a lot of men, I'm very good at petting their little egos to get the information I need. But, come on. This is a huge problem, and we're all a team, and we should all be working together. And there should be no gods of tech out there, and there should be no billionaires in tech out there. And I hope that the younger generation is able to collaborate and, not push up these icons like Elon and let them be the deciding factor of everything,
Well, I think if I look inside my home, my kids, I think we're in good shape. So
good.
We'll have to see. Well, Deb, unfortunately, we have tapped the allocated time bucket again,
and we just barely scratched the surface.
Right. That's kind of the whole point, And I'll end with the last thought of my own on this, and you can have yours, but. I think that's the most fascinating thing about the near and far future. We're all obsessed with AI right now, and AI is doing a lot of things. But the thing we're really good about is doing a few, right? We all know the old truism about I'm actually seeing a very small part of what I think I'm seeing. My eyes aren't really biologically capable of grabbing the definition of a camera. I think it'll always be the case, right? We had 35 minutes. We're not made out of silicon. And that's where we find our art.
Correct. Well, I just want to plug my book, the Cyber Thriller series, the Breaking Backbones Hacker Trilogy. Just look it up on Amazon or anywhere you buy books, and give me good reviews, please. I need to play the algorithm game, speaking of social media and algorithms and everything else. So it's a constant hustle to get people to buy these books, but they buy them and they love them. And so I've got all 5-star reviews, and some people who read them are technical, some are not. Some think they're too technical, some think they need to be more technical. It was the balance I was trying to get all along throughout all 3 books. So hopefully you'll enjoy the story, because it does start with a drone war and a kamikaze drone in book 1, and takes off from there. And when you read them, you'll know that I actually wrote them for Netflix, and I do have a producer We haven't been able to get it off the ground yet, but we're still working on that.
Well, I thoroughly endorse all those, and give the book on Amazon, Kindle, those normal places, and I will.
Yeah, Apple, everywhere, and we will put a link. Let's definitely put a link in the abstract. I'll send that to you.
Awesome. All right, thanks,
you. Thanks, Chris.
Wonderful to see you from Hawaii, right? I usually ask that.
From Maui, yes, from Maui.
God bless the internets. All right. See you, folks.
Bye for now.